In the heart of Africa, a quiet revolution is stirring beneath the relentless Sahel sun. For decades, outsiders called this land barren, a place where hunger stalked villages and imports filled empty shelves. Yet in recent years, the narrative has begun to fracture. Something new is unfolding. A transformation that does not rely on foreign pity, but on the soil itself. Across Burkina Faso and beyond, leaders, farmers, and visionaries are daring to ask a forbidden question. Can African agriculture rewrite its destiny? The stakes could not be higher. On one side lies dependence, endless shipments of wheat, rice, and medicine flowing in from distant powers. On the other lies sovereignty, fields that not only feed, but heal, empower, and restore dignity. The battleground is not only food, but the future itself. And the symbol, perhaps unexpectedly, is a plant, humble, spiked, and green, rising defiantly from golden sand. Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is the story of survival and sovereignty. Subscribe and stand with us for an Africa that refuses to bow again. Because the question before us is not small. Will agricultural innovation be Africa's cure or its next illusion? The story of this revolution begins not in silence, but in the dust storms of history. For generations, the Sahel has been painted in bleak colors, images of famine, cracked earth, and relief trucks groaning under foreign grain. The land was labeled unforgiving, the people portrayed as dependents of global charity. Yet such a picture ignored a deeper truth. The Sahel holds not only struggle, but also immense, untapped promise. Beneath the parched surface, the soil is capable of more than the world has dared to imagine. At the center of this transformation stands Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. In early 2025, his government announced an experiment that defied expectations. 100 hectares of aloe vera planted directly into the sands of the desert. It was not maize, not sorghum, not rice. The crops the world expected Africans to grow. Instead, it was a plant of healing, long associated with medicine, skincare, and resilience. For many, the idea sounded absurd. The Sahel had been written off by colonial agronomists as barren, good for grazing goats, and little else. But here was a wager that the desert itself could be transformed. The decision came against a backdrop of crisis. Africa, a continent of more than 1 billion people, imported over 80% of its wheat in the early 2020s. Food insecurity left nearly 50 million Africans malnourished every year. Climate change only sharpened the knife, droughts lasting longer, floods destroying fields, locust swarms sweeping across East Africa. Traditional crops strained against conditions they could no longer withstand. In this storm, Burkina Faso chose to gamble on something different. The symbolism mattered as much as the biology. Aloe vera thrives where other plants wilt. It stores water in its leaves, resists harsh heat, and regenerates even after damage. In many cultures, it is the plant of immortality, used to treat burns, wounds, and illness. For Burkina Faso, choosing aloe was not merely an agricultural choice, it was a declaration. If even the desert can heal, then our nation can heal too. The plan was precise. Solar-powered drip irrigation lines were laid across sandy fields, carrying measured droplets directly to each seedling. Compost, made from fish remains, straw, and organic waste, was buried deep to trap moisture in otherwise hostile ground. By the close of planting season, the once lifeless dunes near Ouagadougou shimmered with tiny green spikes. Farmers from surrounding villages gathered to watch. At first, they laughed. Aloe in the desert? But their laughter softened into murmurs of curiosity. Weeks passed, and the impossible began to take root. The seedlings thickened, their gel-filled leaves glistening under merciless heat. By mid-year, the pilot field stretched like an emerald quilt across golden dust. To walk among those rows was to step into a dream. Fatou, a 42-year-old mother from Kaya, visited the site and touched the leaves with disbelief. For years, she had paid exorbitant prices for imported ointments to treat her children's burns. That day, she broke a leaf and rubbed the gel on her palm. Her words were soft but carried weight. The cure comes from our soil. The first harvest revealed numbers that startled even officials. From the 100 hectares came 2,000 tons of aloe leaves. Some were processed into juice, others into gel, and a portion sent to laboratories in Ouagadougou for trials. The yield was modest compared to global giants, but for the Sahel, it was a revolution. Markets buzzed as bottles labeled Faso Aloe, grown in the desert, appeared on stalls. Buyers turned them over in their hands, marveling. How can this come from here? The desert, long dismissed as lifeless, had produced healing. It was more than agriculture. It was identity, defiance, and proof of possibility. For the first time in living memory, the Sahel was exporting hope rather than importing survival. And yet, even as farmers smiled and clinics reported fewer untreated burns, whispers began to circulate. Would these plants endure the next drought? Could solar pumps survive the heat? And, most pressing, what would happen when foreign corporations turned their gaze towards this green miracle? The first chapter had closed, but the next was waiting. Because every revolution has its test, and the aloe revolution was about to meet its own. When the first bottles of Faso Aloe gel reached the markets of Ouagadougou, they carried more than medicine. They carried a promise that the Sahel could not only survive, but thrive. Villagers lined up to touch the spiked leaves stacked in baskets. Children drank sweetened aloe juice called le jus du désir, and women's cooperatives began experimenting with creams and ointments made from fresh gel. The excitement was palpable, but beneath the joy pulsed a deeper current, disbelief giving way to pride. International observers could not ignore it. Reports from European trade journals described Burkina Faso as the unlikely cradle of a desert pharmacy. Nigerian and Ghanaian newspapers speculated about cross-border trade. A Kenyan agricultural think tank hailed the project as a model of agricultural innovation. Suddenly, the same Sahel once branded a burden was being called the breadbasket of medicine. But perhaps the strongest reaction came from the people themselves. Nkaya Musa, a 50-year-old farmer, held up a single leaf and declared, "We thought this was for foreigners. Now it grows in our soil. When my children ask what sovereignty looks like, I show them this leaf." His words spread across local radio like wildfire. In Bobo Dioulasso, women queued at stalls, buying aloe not as an exotic import, but as a harvest of their own desert. For families long excluded from the global health economy, the symbolism was electrifying. And yet, as hope surged, skepticism sharpened. Could this miracle last? Droughts had not vanished. Aquifers beneath the Sahel were fragile, already strained by population growth. Engineers warned that without strict regulation, irrigation could deplete groundwater reserves. Economists noted that 2,000 tons was still tiny in global markets. Without scaling up, Faso Aloe might remain a curiosity rather than a competitor. The true climax came not in the fields, but in the corridors of government. In late 2026, rumors leaked of negotiations between Burkina Faso's Ministry of Commerce and a European pharmaceutical consortium. The deal promised vast investment, high-tech extraction plants, refrigerated transport fleets, guaranteed buyers across Europe. To officials, it looked like salvation. But to farmers, it sounded like betrayal. Whispers turned to outrage when investigative journalists revealed a hidden clause. Export would take priority over domestic supply. Even if Burkinabe clinics ran dry, truckloads would still depart for Paris, Berlin, and New York. The plant chosen as a symbol of sovereignty now risked becoming another chain of dependency. The reaction was swift and furious. Farmers marched through Kaya with aloe leaves raised like banners, chanting, "Our medicine is not for sale." Women's cooperatives denounced the deal. They took our gold. They took our cotton. Now they want our aloe. Must every victory be stolen? In Parliament, tempers boiled. Opposition lawmakers accused ministers of hypocrisy. Traoré speaks of sovereignty, yet his cabinet signs it away. The world too responded. African newspapers framed the deal as neo-colonialism in disguise. European outlets defended it as modernization, claiming that without foreign capital, the project would stagnate. American analysts were divided. Some praised the bold partnership, Others warned of exploitation. In West Africa, solidarity mixed with rivalry. Ghanaian regulators raised certification concerns, while Nigerian herbal markets feared being flooded with cheap Sahel aloe. In the midst of this storm, Captain Ibrahim Traoré appeared on national radio. His voice, steady but edged with fire, cut through static. Burkina Faso will never again sell its soul for quick profit. Aloe is the medicine of our people. It will serve us first, then the world. The statement electrified his supporters, but raised questions abroad. Was he protecting sovereignty or closing the door to progress? What had begun as a simple field experiment had escalated into a political drama. The fields of aloe were no longer just agriculture. They were battlegrounds of dignity, power, and global interest. And as the Sahel sun beat down, one question lingered. Would the aloe revolution heal the nation or fracture it under the weight of foreign hunger? The storm over aloe was not just about crops. It was about lives, daily routines, and the fragile contract between people and power. As the fields expanded from 100 to 200 hectares, the first waves of impact rippled through Burkina Faso. In villages once gripped by migration, farmers stayed through the dry season, tending to green rows instead of leaving for city streets. For the first time, households found stability. Women's cooperatives reported new income streams, which funded school books, community wells, and even microcredit schemes. Rural clinics, once dependent on delayed shipments of imported ointments, stocked fresh aloe gel produced locally. Data revealed something remarkable. Burn-related untreated cases dropped by nearly 1/3 in regions where aloe leaves were distributed freely. The short-term gains were tangible. Jobs multiplied across planting, harvesting, processing, and distribution. Local pride swelled as Faso Aloe appeared not only in markets but also in urban pharmacies, challenging the dominance of imported creams. A sense of self-reliance was stirring, a whisper that Burkina Faso could indeed heal itself. Yet with hope came political tension. Opposition leaders accused the government of turning aloe into propaganda, exploiting symbolism, while leaving staple foods neglected. "You cannot eat sovereignty," sneered one European trade lobbyist on television, a phrase quickly echoed by domestic critics. Was aloe truly a solution or a distraction from rice and millet? The debate spilled into households. In Ouagadougou, some fathers worried that focusing on aloe meant fewer resources for maize, still the backbone of local diets. Others argued that aloe offered a future where health and economy intertwined. "If this leaf pays my child's school fees and treats her wounds," said Kadiatu, a 28-year-old cooperative worker, "then I do not care if I eat millet or maize. What matters is dignity." Meanwhile, rumors of foreign contracts deepened mistrust. Leaked documents about export clauses made many Burkinabe fear that sovereignty was slipping into familiar patterns of exploitation. Farmers who once celebrated Traoré's speeches now asked hard questions. Who truly owns the fields? The state, the people, or the corporations waiting outside our borders? The medium-term stakes became clear. If aloe remained under local control, Burkina Faso could strengthen its economy, reduce dependency on foreign medicine, and gain leverage in regional markets. If not, the plant of healing risked becoming another chain in the long history of extraction. The broader political implications stretched further still. Other African nations began watching closely. Mali, Niger, and Ghana debated their own desert aloe initiatives. ECOWAS quietly studied whether a medicinal plants charter could standardize trade and prevent undercutting between neighbors. In this sense, Burkina Faso's gamble was no longer national, it was continental, but such possibilities carried risk. Rivals feared that Burkina Faso might monopolize the market. Smuggling networks, already thriving on gold and fuel, eyed aloe as the next lucrative trade. And international powers, the EU, China, the US, saw opportunity in either supporting or sabotaging the experiment, depending on whose interests prevailed. For the people on the ground, however, the question remained immediate. Would aloe stay accessible in local clinics or vanish into trucks bound for Europe? The future was fragile, suspended between promise and peril, as one farmer in Kaya put it on a crackling radio interview. "We were told our desert is dead. Now it is alive. But will this life belong to us, or will it be sold away?" The aloe revolution had already rewritten daily life, but its political fate was uncertain. Everything depended on what came next, whether sovereignty would be defended or quietly signed away in contracts few would ever read. And so the cliffhanger sharpens. Is this green miracle a foundation for independence, or just another mirage dressed in hope? The Sahel's green miracle did not unfold in isolation. The world was watching, and every leaf of aloe carried implications far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. In London, analysts within the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office assessed the project with cautious intrigue. The United Kingdom, long entwined with West Africa through aid, trade, and diplomacy, now faced a dilemma. On one hand, supporting the Aloe initiative aligned with climate resilience agendas and promises of sustainable investment. On the other, a successful Sahel industry threatened existing pharmaceutical interests rooted in Europe. British media framed the story as a remarkable experiment, yet beneath the praise was a question. Would the UK back African sovereignty or seek its own stake in the healing plant? Across Africa, the reactions were mixed but vibrant. ECOWAS ministers discussed whether to draft a framework to regulate medicinal plants, hoping to avoid the rivalries that once fractured regional markets for cocoa and cotton. Ghana and Nigeria debated certification standards, wary of Burkina Faso's growing influence. Mali quietly began testing its own aloe patches, inspired by the desert experiment. For the first time, the Sahel was not a case study in crisis, but a laboratory of possibility. Europe's stance fractured along familiar lines. In Brussels, some EU officials argued for strict import standards, citing safety and quality concerns. Pharmaceutical lobbies whispered that Sahel Aloe, with its unusually high gel content, could undercut European producers. Yet in Paris, cosmetic giants dispatched scouts to Ouagadougou, curious whether the desert's aloe might be marketed as a premium product, born of sand, strong as Africa. The contradiction was stark: admiration in public, maneuvering in private. Russia and China moved differently. Moscow's agricultural envoys praised the project as evidence that Africa could thrive outside Western dependency. Beijing, always alert to strategic commodities, hinted at partnership offers. Investment in processing plants in exchange for long-term supply contracts. For both powers, aloe was not just a crop, it was an opening to deepen their foothold in Africa's resource map. In Washington, think tanks hailed the aloe experiment as climate-smart agriculture, fitting neatly into the language of adaptation and resilience. Yet even American voices admitted unease. Would Africa's healing plant be allowed to benefit Africans first, or would global corporations inevitably claim it for themselves? Through all these reactions, one thread remained clear. The aloe revolution had shifted Africa's image on the global stage. The desert, once invoked as a synonym for scarcity, now symbolized resilience and healing. And the world's powers were positioning themselves, not just to applaud, but to influence the outcome. The question now was not whether the aloe fields could thrive, but who would ultimately shape their destiny, Burkina Faso, or the forces circling beyond its borders. By 2027, the aloe fields stretched further than anyone imagined. What began as a pilot on 100 hectares had grown into a network of plantations, cooperatives, and small processing hubs. In Burkina Faso, families spoke of aloe not as an experiment, but as a livelihood. Yet foresight revealed that the journey was far from finished. Ahead lay three diverging paths. The first path was dependence disguised as progress. If foreign contracts were signed without safeguards, the Sahel risked becoming a supplier of raw leaves for Europe and North America. Clinics at home could run dry while refrigerated trucks rolled north, repeating the same colonial patterns that stripped Africa of its cotton, gold, and cocoa. In this vision, sovereignty became a slogan, spoken but not lived. The second path was resilience through agricultural innovation. If Burkina Faso enforced its Aloe Sovereignty Act and expanded processing capacity, aloe could anchor a new model. Finished products made in Africa, distributed first to African families, then to the world. Women's cooperatives might grow into regional enterprises, farmers could access stable incomes, and rural clinics would no longer beg for imported medicine. In this scenario, the desert itself became a teacher, proof that Africa can transform scarcity into abundance. The third path was cooperation. Across West Africa, discussions of a medicinal plants charter hinted at unity. If realized, nations from Mali to Ghana could regulate production, set shared prices, and defend farmers against predatory contracts. Instead of competing, they could build solidarity, an African front in the global health economy. Such unity would be fragile, threatened by rivalries and smuggling networks. But if achieved, it would mark a turning point in how Africa manages its resources. For ordinary people, these choices were not abstract. In Dori Kadiatu, a young mother employed in a cooperative said it plainly, "Before, Europe sold us medicine. Now we make it ourselves. This is what sovereignty feels like." Her voice captured the essence of the gamble, that sovereignty is not theory, but practice lived leaf by leaf, clinic by clinic, child by child. And yet, dangers loomed. Climate change could dry aquifers, pests might strike new monocultures, and corruption could hollow out the most hopeful laws. If vigilance waned, the green miracle could wither. The crossroads is clear: dependency, resilience, or solidarity. Each path carries its own risks, but only one offers dignity that endures. The desert has already answered. It can give life. The true question is whether Africa will protect that gift or surrender it once again. The journey of aloe in the Sahel is more than the story of a plant. It is the story of dignity reclaimed. Once dismissed as barren, the desert now whispers a different truth. That even in the harshest dust, life can rise, heal, and empower. From Ouagadougou to Kaya, families no longer wait for imported creams to treat burns. They reach into baskets of green leaves and find medicine in their own soil. This is the quiet revolution of our time. Yet the question remains unresolved. Will these fields anchor a future where African agriculture becomes the backbone of sovereignty? Or will they be captured by contracts signed in distant boardrooms? The future bends in both directions. In one vision, the Sahel becomes the green pharmacy of the continent, exporting finished goods proudly labeled "Made in Africa." In another, the same fields are stripped of value, leaving farmers with empty hands while profits flow abroad. The truth is this: sovereignty is not promised. It must be defended. It must be lived. And it must be written into every law, every cooperative, every leaf harvested under the desert sun. For if agricultural innovation is to mean anything, it must first serve the children of Africa before it fills the shelves of foreign stores. Tonight, as the sun sets over fields shimmering green against golden sand, the choice still lies open. Will Africa guard what it grows or surrender it? That is not a question for governments alone. It is a question for all of us who believe in dignity, resilience, and freedom. If this story moves something in your chest, do not just scroll past. Like, share, and subscribe. Our ancestors endured silence too long. Now it is time to speak our future out loud. Because from this day forward, the Sahel does not stand as a symbol of despair. It stands as proof that African agriculture can heal, and that agricultural innovation, rooted in our soil, can shape a new tomorrow. The desert has already answered. Now, the world is waiting for Africa's reply.